I have ruled the Kalne hold for 11 years, and in all that time I never learned to be afraid the way I was afraid during the 9th month of my son's fits. They came at the same hour every night, near enough that the household had stopped needing a clock. An hour past midnight, Edric would wake screaming, both small hands pressed to his own throat as if something inside him were closing a door he could not open again. And then, 20 minutes later, as suddenly as it began, it would stop, and he would sleep as though nothing at all had happened, and wake in the morning with no memory of it, and ask why everyone looked so tired. We had 9 physicians by then. I counted them the way you count losses. The first 3 treated it as a fever, and it was not a fever. The next 2 treated it as a nervous complaint, and gave him tonics that made him worse. The high priestess came with her braziers and her chanting, and burned 6 bowls of temple incense over 8 weeks, and when that failed she told me, gently, the way you tell a mother the thing she already suspects, that some children are simply born with an old debt attached to them, and that debts of that kind are not always meant to be paid off. I asked her to leave and did not invite her back. I had sat through all 9 of those examinations myself, in the same chair, with the same lamp burning low, and could have recited their methods before they arrived. Each began the same way, a formal bow, a request to see the boy alone, a long hour of instruments and questions directed entirely at Edric, as though the fits were a private conversation between my son and his own body, that the rest of the household had no part in. None asked the nursemaid a single question. None asked what he wore, or what he was given at bedtime, or who had handled his things that week. They asked him what he felt, and he was 7, and could not tell them, and so they wrote long reports full of careful uncertainty, and the fits went on exactly as before. By the time the 9th physician packed his case and would not meet my eyes on his way out, the chancellor was the one who suggested the human. He said it the way you suggest something you're embarrassed to be suggesting. There was a woman, a border doctor, decades of ordinary practice in the outlying settlements, no rank, no temple training, cheap because no one else would take the contract. He said we had tried everything grand. Perhaps it was time to try something small. She arrived on a supply transport 2 days later, in a coat that had clearly been mended more than once, carrying a case that rattled like tin cups instead of instruments. Dr. Helena Bryce. She did not bow to me, which I noticed, and did not apologize for not bowing, which I noticed more. She did not examine my son that first evening. She sat in the corner of the amber room in a plain chair someone had found her, and watched. She watched the nursemaid bank the fire. She watched the night guard change shift. She watched Edric sleep with an ordinary, unhurried attention that made the room feel, for the first time in 9 months, like a room and not a shrine. He isn't in danger tonight, she told me, when I asked what she saw. I'm not looking at him yet. I'm looking at everything around him. Whatever this is, it's been doing the same thing at the same hour for months. Something in this room is consistent. I want to know what. I did not understand her, and told her so. Curses don't keep office hours, she said. Poisons do. The word landed in the room like a dropped plate. My physicians had used 100 careful words for what was wrong with my son. Imbalance, affliction, old debt, and none of them had used that one. I asked her, with more heat than I intended, whether she thought 9 physicians and a priestess had missed something so plain. I think, she said, that 9 physicians were all trained to look at him. I'm going to look at everything he touches instead. She spent the next 2 days doing something that felt, to my household, almost insultingly ordinary. She did not consult the temple archives or request the physician's notes. She sat with the nursemaid and asked her, one plain question at a time, what Edric ate, what he wore, what he held when he could not sleep, in what order, on what nights. She asked the night guard the same, and the seamstress who kept his linens, and the boy who brought the coal. She wrote almost nothing down. She simply listened, the way you listen to someone you actually expect to tell you something true. On the 3rd evening she asked to see everything Edric wore to bed. There was very little, a nightshirt, and around his neck, on a plain leather cord, an old copper pendant shaped like a closed hand, worn since before he could walk. It had been his grandfather's, and his grandfather's mother's before that. A Calne family charm, meant to keep bad dreams from finding purchase. Every physician who examined him had seen it, noted it a harmless relic, and moved on to grander theories. Dr. Bryce turned it over in the lamplight for a long time, running her thumb along a seam in the metal where the copper had worn thin with age. How long has this been recast? She asked. I did not know what she meant by recast. She explained, patiently. That old family metal is melted down and mixed with whatever is on hand when it cracks, and that a seam this thin and dull meant it had been repaired at some point by whoever last found it broken. She asked if I knew who. I sent for the steward's records. The pendant had cracked 9 months ago, almost to the week, and had been quietly mended by a jeweler in the lower city, rather than sent to the palace smiths, because my late husband's aunt had not wanted the family to know it had ever been damaged. The jeweler used what solder he had. Dr. Bryce did not need to say the rest aloud, though she did, gently, because I asked her to. Cheap solder in the lower city was often cut with lead. A child who wore that pendant against his skin every night, who held it in his fist when he could not sleep, who put it near his mouth the way small children do without anyone noticing, would take in a little more of it every week. Lead does not announce itself with a fever. It builds slowly, and can produce exactly the kind of nightly seizure my son had, regular, terrifying, gone by morning, because the body clears what little it can before the next dose arrives. We removed the pendant that night. I would like to say the fits stopped instantly, and they nearly did. 3 more nights, each shorter and gentler than the last, and then nothing. It has been 4 months now. He sleeps until morning and remembers his dreams instead of forgetting them, which I am told is a good sign, though I would have believed almost anything a physician told me at this point if it came with proof instead of prayer. I offered Dr. Bryce a title. I offered her rooms in the East Wing, a permanent post as royal physician, more gold than her border clinic would see in a decade. She listened to all of it with the same unhurried attention she'd given the nursemaid, and then she declined, plainly, without performance. I have patients across the river who'll die of ordinary things if I'm not there for them, she said. You have a temple full of physicians who know a great deal about curses and very little about solder. Have someone check every heirloom worn against a child's skin in every noble house in this hold. That's worth more to me than a title. I asked her, before she left, why she hadn't simply told us what she suspected on the first night, saved everyone the 2 days of watching and listening. Because I didn't know yet, she said. I only knew how to find out. I have thought about that answer more than any other thing said to me in 11 years of rule. My physicians had arrived certain and left defeated, each one narrowing his gaze onto my son alone until there was nothing left to see but a small, frightened boy who could not explain himself. She had arrived with nothing and widened her gaze instead, to the fire, the linens, the coal, the cord around his neck, and found, in the space everyone else had decided was empty, the one plain thing that mattered. I do not think she considered it cleverness. I think she considered it the correct order to ask questions in, learned somewhere with no temple to blame and no throne to please, only a patient, and a reason not yet found. She left on the same rattling transport she'd arrived on, in the same mended coat, and refused an escort to the port. I sent the steward's findings to every noble house in the hold within the week, as she had asked, and 2 more cracked heirlooms turned up before autumn, quietly, before they could do to some other child what ours had nearly done to Edric. I watched her go from the nursery window, my son asleep behind me, breathing easily for the first time in 9 months, and understood what the Chancellor had meant by trying something small. It was never small. It only looked that way from a throne.